Hi, everybody, and welcome to Bravo Behavior. I'd like to, again, welcome you here. I'm sure you've had a long day of teaching after a long weekend, but I hope that your Labor Day weekend was relaxing and restful. Maybe spent some time with family and friends, who knows, in the middle of a pandemic, but here we are. So thank you for being here again. Thank you for showing your dedication to how much you want to continue developing your craft as a teacher so that you can be the best teacher you can be for your students, even if it is from across the screen. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is welcome the Fine Arts team at the Georgia Department of Education. I am Casey Hall. As some of you may know me, some of you may not. I just the most recent to join the team, the Fine Arts team at the Department of Education. I started in quarantine, so it has been an interesting transition from teacher to being at the Department of Education in the middle of a pandemic, but we are making it work and still providing you some awesome opportunities and resources here. We also have Jessica Booth, who has been at the Department of Education for the past 6 years, and she's really the one that started all of it. Really thank her for all of her advocacy for fine arts at the state level. And also we have Paul McLean, who has been with the Department of Education for the last 2 years. So that's our team here, and we are here to support you in the best we can and be an advocate for the fine arts. Excuse me. Just before we get started, some digital meeting norms as we continue in this world of virtual teaching and learning. The first one is be focused and present. You may have a lot of different things going on at the moment, as I know most everybody does, especially when it's digital meetings, but be as focused and present as possible. For this webinar, I would like to have a bit of discussion on the topic of behavior, obviously, as we go through it. So when I ask you, I would love if you can unmute yourselves, and then in the meantime, keep yourselves muted so there's no audio interruptions, but I'll let you know when we get to the point where I would like some discussion. So just if you're able, be prepared for that. Unfortunately, on this platform, I cannot see any of you, so I would only be able to hear you. So if you would, when it is time for discussion, to speak your name so that I can know who's talking, and then we can go from there. So the next one is just, again, kind of going along with the discussion, is to be willing to share and participate. It makes digital trainings more fun. It makes regular trainings more fun, and it's just a way to connect as we are screen to screen now and not face to face like we wish we could be. The next one is have an open mind and be willing to grow. Behavior is a very tricky and interesting topic in the world of education, and managing it is a whole nother ball game. So be willing to be receptive of and honestly reflective of some of the things that you've been doing in your classroom, or have been doing, or would like to change, and kind of have an open mind about that as we talk about it. And then kind of a big note is, if you have any questions or comments and concerns, please use the chat box feature, which for me is at the very bottom of the GoToWebinar kind of control panel. I know there is a questions feature, and we're not really going to be using the questions feature. It's a bit confusing, honestly. So just use the chat box for any questions, and then my colleagues Jessica and Paul are going to be monitoring the chat and will speak out as necessary. So just use the chat box and not the questions, and we will continue on. And then before we get started talking about Bravo behavior, I did want to go through some of the things that we offer from the Fine Arts Department at the Department of Education. Quickly, briefly, before we get started. So the first thing is that we are currently the only state to have 3 fine arts staff members at the state level. Again, that was Jess was the first one that was brought on, and then she added more people as it went on, which is really great. And so the fact that we have 3 is amazing. We do have STEAM certification for K-12 schools, the Fine Arts Diploma Seal for Georgia Public High School and charter schools. A district can apply for students. Students must have 4 years in an arts course, 20 hours of community service in the arts, and then a capstone project at the end. We have Georgia Standards of Excellence for 460 arts courses, which is amazing. And with those, we do have state course descriptions that go along with them. And then recently we had the first fine arts class to count as a core credit, which was dramatic writing, which is really awesome. And then we have 3,000 plus instructional resources for fine arts teachers, which we're going to go over briefly. START grants, which have provided $500,000 in the last 2 years for rural school districts, and we're starting year 3 currently. We have statewide professional development courses, which you are attending one right now, and there's more in the future, so make sure to go back to our website. We have a District Arts Administrator Council. The Fine Arts now counts for 6.67 points on the CCRPI score for schools, which is awesome because initially the fine arts were not included in the CCRPI, and things like PBIS, which is positive behavior, initially only accounted for a half of a point. So it's a really big deal for the fine arts to be included in that score, and it's a hefty amount of points, which is great. And then we have the free professional learning opportunities, or the PLO, for music for the early childhood educator. There's also one for art and theater, and those are listed on our website as well. And then we have new added instructional resources for social emotional learning and life skills in music. And then we have a free training on digital teaching and learning in the arts. It's a smart infographic, so you can click it, you can do it at your own pace, on your own time. You can go back and reference it if you need it, and that's also on our website. So thanks for letting me briefly run through all of that. It's a lot, which is great that we have the opportunity to give those to you. And then for those instructional resources, specifically in music, we have them for general music, kindergarten through 6th grade, and grade 7th and 8th are coming soon. So be on the lookout if you're a middle school general music teacher. We have it for band, orchestra, chorus, music technology, and again, like I said before, social emotional learning and life skills in music, and sample, distance, and learning plans have just been recently updated. For our curriculum, for the instructional resources, we have for each course, we have a curriculum map that contains a list of standards for each of the different units in the curriculum, and then the key components to be covered in the unit per course. The next level below that, or the next piece to that, is those unit plans. It's a more focused unit, has standards and elements listed by the artistic processes, and a list of lesson plans that are with that unit, things like example assessments, and a list of supplemental resources available within that unit. All of these are hyperlinked in music right now, which is really great, so it's quick access. In the lesson plans, things like recommended pacing, standards of excellence covered within each specific lesson, and any assessments, concepts, differentiated learning examples, student materials, student procedures, teacher procedures, anything that fits into a lesson plan we have provided for you in those. And then we also have things like diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments, as you can see here with this 4th grade rubric for general music. Things like that are all in those instructional resources, as well as PowerPoint presentations, handouts, worksheets, and videos. So there's a lot there, and where do you find it? The quickest way to find it is to go to our Fine Arts website. You can Google search Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts, and it will take you directly to our website. And if you look right here, you scroll down, we have new updates. We have fall semester professional development for arts teachers, and here's that infographic that you can click on and go at your own pace for that professional development on digital teaching and learning in the arts. Here's where we have music-specific professional development. We have an upcoming one, just a little plug, on Thursday too, about comparing cultural pedagogies in music. If you'd like to register, you can do that here. And then for those instructional resources, we have the remote teaching and learning plans or the distance and digital plans. Those are samples about how to teach in a digital atmosphere in music. And then here's our instructional frameworks. This link takes you to a hyperlink document. It's pretty big, it's 41 pages, and they're all hyperlinked that will automatically download to your computer, which is really great if you need it. So I just wanted to show you that so you knew it was available. Get back to my screen. And then here we go, finally, whew, we're done. A lot of stuff, but I would be remiss if I didn't give that to people who didn't know about it yet. So thank you for bearing with me during that time. And here we go for Bravo Behavior. Thank you again for being here, and let's get started. I do want to say that if you came for a one-stop shop for fancy behavior strategies to fix all of the behavior problems in your classroom, this webinar is going to be a bit more than that, actually. I won't be sharing fancy behavior strategies that will seemingly fix all of your behavior problems in your classroom, because the minute that they don't work, you probably are going to throw them away, like, without a second thought, throw them away and not really think about or reflect of why they didn't work in your classroom. And I'm also not going to provide broad behavior strategies that work for every kid in every situation every time, because behavior is so individual. And each case is almost like a case-by-case basis. So painting with broad strokes on behavior strategies doesn't seem to quite work. So instead, this webinar is really going to be diving into a understanding of human behavior itself, and how basically how to paint a clearer picture of why your students behave the way they do, and what we can do as teachers to be proactive and combat some of the tricky behaviors we see frequently in our classrooms, and kind of be able to prepare ourselves to de-escalate those before behaviors even happen. So as we go through the webinar, I have a little bit of overview just so you know what we're going to talk about. I do have a quick little icebreaker that I think is going to be fun, just a quick little poll. Then we're going to talk about the problem-solving model and diagnosing the issue. Then we're going to define behavior and take the stranger test. We're going to learn about the ABCs of behavior and the functions that go with that. And then I do have some behavior strategies that are called the Great 8 of behavior. And then some tried and true tricks from experience, magic behavior tricks that have worked for me and some other teachers that I just talked to as I was creating this presentation. And then there will be a time for Q&A at the end, additionally, if we need it, and a feedback survey before we leave. So what I want you to do is take a look at these 4 GIFs, and I want you to answer which GIF most accurately describes how you feel about managing behavior in the classroom, or basically how you feel about behavior in your classroom. And so I'm going to set up the poll for you, and you should see it on your screen. Once you do, yes, answer that for me, and hopefully that works. Love it, love it. Okay, super quick. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. Thank you for participating. I'm going to share the results. Actually, it looks like number 1, such a great GIF. Honestly, I use that GIF all the time in my personal life, actually, but I thought it was funny. So thank you for doing that quick little icebreaker of how you feel about managing behavior in a classroom. It's a good indication. It's a good little diagnostic assessment for me through this activity. So thank you for indulging me in that. So let's go on to talking about the problem-solving model. And really, when we're talking about behavior, to me, it's like being a doctor and diagnosing an issue. And kind of, we're going to take this model and go through this webinar using this model as we continue on, as we progress through the webinar itself. So the first one is problem ID, or problem identification. The next one is problem analysis, a plan implementation, and then program evaluation. And so kind of what that translates to is what's the problem? That's we're identifying what the problem is. A problem analysis is asking the question, why is this problem occurring? And then the plan implementation, is what are we going to do about that? And then the fourth step is, did it work? That's the program evaluation, where we kind of reflect about, did whatever we did work? Here's an example of what that looks like. Not true, but I just wanted to show you how this story kind of fit into each of these problem-solving model steps. The first one is, what's the problem? And my niece fell at home and hurt her hand. Okay, so we identified what the problem was. Her hand hurts from falling. The next thing is, why is this problem occurring? Well, we went to the doctor. An x-ray revealed that she broke her finger and dislocated it at the joint. So that is why the problem is occurring. And then what's the plan? Obviously, doctors were involved in this scenario. She had surgery to relocate the joint, pin it, and cast her hand. So that's kind of answers the question, what are we going to do, or what are the doctors, all that whole process of that. And then the last one is a program evaluation. Did it work? And we'll find out in 4 weeks, but evidence tells us that we should. So that's kind of a fake summary or fake scenario of how this problem-solving model kind of works. And if it did work, then obviously the problem is solved. If it didn't work, we have to go back to the problem-solving model and figure out a new plan and stuff like that. So that's going to continue on throughout this whole process. So I just wanted to kind of hone in on that and really think about being a doctor and kind of, even though we're not doctors, and some of us are, but medical doctors, I should say, and really diagnosing these issues of behavior that we're seeing in our classroom. And so part of that problem ID is defining behavior. And this is super important when you are asked either by administrators or counselors to take a record of a student's behavior or situations that are happening, whether that's note-taking or you're collecting basically behavioral data on students' behavior in your classroom if need be for whatever reason. But something that's really beneficial in this is it has to be observable and measurable. So when you're defining a behavior in your classroom, the behavior must be seen. So the big question when you're defining behavior is, how does it look? And down here, I put an example of disrespectful. When, say you had to write up a student, for instance, and you wrote, the student was disrespectful, I can't really see that. What does disrespectful look like? So when you are writing these notes or trying to define and be really trying to hone in on what the behavior actually is, it has to be seen. And the other thing about that, disrespectful means something differently from me to you. What is disrespectful in your classroom could be fine in my classroom. It just kind of depends. And that whole definition from person to person really makes the waters muddy. And we want to be as clear as possible when we're defining behavior. So, and we'll talk about that in a minute, what that looks like. And then for the measurable aspect of it, we need to basically tick the times that the behavior is happening. So the behavior happens during music class each day/week, or has happened this many times in one class. This is important too because it shows the rate at which it's happening in your classroom. It's not just a one-off, it's happening multiple times and it's actually becoming an issue. So knowing exactly how much it's happening could be an indicator later on that we'll find out about how to kind of resolve some of those issues that we're seeing. So it needs to be observable and measurable. And to me, that's very similar if you've heard of what a SMART goal is, which stands for a goal that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. But it's something that you don't want. It's a it's a SMART goal of a behavior that we don't want. Kind of when I think about that. Sorry, we have some. I live right by a fire station, and there's the fire truck. Sorry about that, everybody. And the next slide, sorry, the next point is kind of sounds a bit strange because it's talking about passing a stranger test, and this is not talking about stranger danger, obviously, but it's saying, would a stranger, if an administrator from a completely different part of the country or county or whatever came into your classroom and observed this student, for instance, would they be able to define the behavior exactly as you did? Again, and this goes back to the disrespectful. Well, that student's being disrespectful. That administrator could say something completely different based on their experience or what they define disrespectful as. So again, the behavior must be seen, it must be observable, and how many times is it happening? And that looks obviously different per what kind of class you're teaching in, whether it's a general music class that you see a student once per week, or you are in a high school class where it's an A-B schedule. Just kind of depends on your own situation. But when you're actually defining behavior, observable and measurable, and it must pass the stranger test. If someone was to look at a student, would the stranger be able to define the behavior that the student is doing exactly like you do? So let's do a little bit of discussion. So I'm going to unmute all of you. If you're uncomfortable talking, that's totally fine. But I would love some discussion as we go through this. The next slide, I have 4 different scenarios. So I would love to get some feedback of what you think if these 4 scenarios, excuse me, are, does the behavior definition meet the criteria that we just talked about? So for student A, I see one person unmuted, thank you. So student A refuses to complete their work. If I was defining that behavior, would it meet the criteria that we just talked about in the past slide? Anybody?
This is Katie. I don't necessarily think so. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can, yeah, thanks, Katie. Okay, you're right. One, the student refuses to complete their work. Is it observable? Kind of, but it's not very specific. Obviously, a student's not completing their work. It's observable by if they're not doing the work. And it's not measurable because it's not saying exactly how much time or how many times it's happening in the classroom itself. So good.
Yes, and I mean, just another thought, but yeah. I don't think it speaks to whether or not you as a teacher can determine, children are going to refuse to do their work. Why is really the thing I would want to get to, is like, are they refusing to do the work because it's inappropriate for the child's ability level? Are they refusing because, there's a host of reasons why they might refuse. Yeah, and so I'm glad that you mentioned that, Katie. That's actually part of one of the next part that we're talking about is that why part. This is literally talking about just defining what the student is doing, defining that particular behavior. Yeah, so we're going to talk about that in a minute. Thanks, Katie. So for student B, the student B gets into physical altercations with other students 1 time per week. Does this behavior definition meet the criteria? Maybe somebody other than Katie.
This is Jerry. Are you talking about observable criteria?
Yes, the things we just talked about in the last slide. Is it observable and measurable?
Yeah. Yes. So does that observed it happen 1 time per week? So that's measurable.
Yes.
So yes, it meets the criteria.
I would say this maybe like halfsies meets the criteria, and because you're right, it does mention the amount of times it is being measured, right? Which is 1 time per week. But again, the definition of physical altercation could be many, many things. You see what I'm saying? It's not as specific. So yes, you can see a physical altercation, but a physical altercation could be me poking you or me, like punching you in the stomach. They're very different. You know what I'm saying? So Yes, it is. It is kind of observable, definitely measurable, but you really want it to be specific because I could come in as a stranger and say something completely different based on that physical altercation. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So really thinking, even if it's physical altercations, getting as specific as possible. Thank you, Jerry. That was great. Student C is disrespectful towards adults and peers 3 times per day. Anybody?
This is Bailey. I think that it's like kind of half again. Disrespectful is very open to interpretation, and 3 times per day is measurable.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Lastly, student D engages in verbal aggression towards adults and peers, which looks like yelling, using profanity, and getting within 6 inches of a person's face once per week. What do we think?
I would say yes. This is Jerry. I would say that's yes.
Yes, this is very clearly defines the behavior that is, one, they're observing, and two, how many times. So if you need some help thinking about it, a good template could be taken from student D. Student D engages in blank, which looks like is a great insert into your as like a template. Like, what does that look like? Because that's the part that's observable. And then at least blank times per week, per day, per class, whatever. So that kind of this is a great example or a template that can be used in most behavior defining situations. Any more questions or comments about that before we move on? We're good? Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to ask you guys to mute yourselves, please. And then we're going to move on and we're going to do some more discussion stuff in a minute. Oops. There we go. Okay, so the ABCs of behavior. Every behavior has an ABC, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm actually going to skip antecedent right now, but for a minute, and go straight to the behavior, which we've talked about. The behavior needs to be specific, observable, and measurable. It is the why. I know, Katie, earlier you were saying about the why, like why did that happen? That comes to the A portion of ABC. So I want to go backtrack back to the antecedent, which happens before. What happened before the behavior was displayed? So with every behavior that happens, and I want to point out that this is not just student behavior. This is adult behavior. This is human behavior. There's always something that happens before, then the behavior, and then the consequence, which is the C part of ABC. So something that I noticed as I was teaching is a lot of kids were coming to me and I had no idea what happened before they came to my classroom. I just saw the behavior. And that was super frustrating to me because it could have been a multitude of things that happened before and I had no idea. I taught general music. So when the kids were dropped off at my classroom, I could have a very angry kid who was upset, but I don't know what happened prior to that. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes the antecedent, the cause of the behavior actually happens somewhere else before they come to you in a classroom, whether that's high school or all the way down to pre-K, or even a toddler, for instance. There's always an antecedent before the behavior happens. So Katie, that brings up your point about, well, I want to know what happened that caused the kid to not be wanting to be able to refuse the work, right? That's that antecedent portion, which is very important to know, right? And every behavior that we do as humans has one. And then the C portion, the consequence, which we kind of talked about, is what is the student or person, we could say for this session, what are they trying to get, quote unquote, from the behavior? And that's going to be important for the next thing we're talking about. So that is functions of behavior. So every behavior has a function, and that is the why. So if you think about that, the function is the why that the behavior is happening. And these are the only 4 options. I got very into behavior management after I took some behavior management classes from a behavior intervention specialist, and this absolutely fascinated me. And I wanted to tell everybody that I knew, because I was so unaware that these are the only 4 reasons, or the whys, of why we respond as humans. There are no other options. This is it. And there's a great acronym for it, and it's called SEAT, SEAT. And so the S of SEAT is the sensory function, and it provides stimulation when anxious or excited. And that can look like hand flapping, body rocking, nail biting. A lot of the times you do see more sensory functions in students on the autism spectrum due to sensory overload or sensory overstimulation. And some maybe with young kids, you've seen kids with a loud sound cover their ears. That's exactly a sensory behavior function. So what you're observing is the kids covering their ears, right? And it's because of a sensory stimulation, which is the music's too loud, or there's a loud sound or something. That's a very real life example, obviously, of sensory function. The next function is escape, and that is when a student exhibits a behavior to remove undesired activities, interactions, or situations, which could look like in the classroom students getting out of doing something they don't want to do, and students will engage in this behavior to escape or avoid work, which we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. And I do want to point out that this can be both internal and external. How many times do you, as an adult, get into an awkward or uncomfortable situation and get on your phone? Ultimately, you're escaping something that you don't want to engage in, right? So that's a very real adult example of what that's like. I know when I get in the elevator, I'm like, oh, okay, this is awkward, so I'm going to hop on my phone so it's less awkward. And that's a form of escape function. And that could look like, as your student actually then leaving, getting up and getting out of your classroom because they don't want to be there. Or it could be something internal, which is something that I found very important to recognize too. When my students shut down in the classroom, that's also a form of escape. And I think that's really important to note for those students that come in your classroom and, get huffy and puffy, and you're like, well, what happened, But that is a function of behavior escape that is apparent in the classroom in many different ways. The next one is probably something that we have all been exposed to and see probably most frequently, and that is the attention function of behavior, the A in SEAT. And that is when a student engages in behavior in order to provide access or awareness to or from people or interactions. Could be putting attention on someone else so that I don't get in trouble, or it could be putting attention on me because I'm seeking that as the student. It can be positive or negative. Everybody does love a positive interactions. So, attention can be good, and positive, and can be negative. And then the last thing is tangible, and that's when a student engages in behavior to get a preferred activity or an item. Probably the most powerful to me example of tangible behavior function is when a student or a child is at a very nice restaurant and they are loud and rambunctious, so the parents give them an iPad or something to make them be quiet and focused on that so that they can have a nice quiet dinner. That is a very clear example of tangible behavior, because ultimately you are training the child to, I'm loud, I get my iPad when I'm loud. Every time that behavior is reinforced because they're getting what they want. They're getting that item or that activity. And that's the tangible function of behavior. Any questions before we move on? Okay, cool. All right. I would again love for you to hop on to the discussion. So if you could unmute your mic again. I did send out 3 videos ahead of time for you to watch. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, it's totally fine. I have a video recap here. But I want to talk about the function of the behavior in the videos. So I'm going to briefly go over the video recap, and then while I'm doing that, if you can unmute your mics, then we can have a really great discussion on these. So the first one, it was dinner time, and there were 3 children who did not want to eat their veggies, but they would rather go play with their toys. But the parents set an expectation that they were not allowed to leave the table until their vegetables had been eaten. So in absolute protest, the children started whining like 2-year-olds. It was kind of hard to watch a little bit. And 2 of the children got smart, and they finally ate their veggies after an hour of sitting at a table crying. It was madness to look at. And they got lots of love and attention from mom and dad after they ate their food like they were expected to. But the one child, even after 2 hours of sitting at the table, was actually like dozing off at the table from crying and whining so much. I mean, talk about stubborn, right? So that child, she was sent to bed with no playtime afterwards. So I want to know what you think whether or not you watched the video is totally fine, but based off this recap in the video, what you thought the function of the behavior was. Anyone?
Hi, this is Jerry. Sorry, my computer keeps muting.
No worries.
I taught pre-K for like 16 years, and this is just behavior that I would see constantly because they would want to be in charge. They want to make their own decisions, and will do just about anything to wear their parents down to where they just say, fine. Just,
right.
Yeah.
So what was the function of the behavior based on the acronym SEAT? Was it sensory? Was it escape? Was it attention? Or was it tangible?
I'm kind of between the E and the A.
Okay.
Because part of it was escape, but part of it was the A part. But I can't remember what it said A. So
attention.
I'm trying to remember.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
So I definitely, when I do not personally have children, so all of this like kind of behavior stuff, I'm obviously doing via teaching. And so it was kind of difficult for me actually to sit back and think very, like what actually is happening, like what's the actual function of the behavior. One, I wasn't there, I'm watching a video, I totally get it, but to actually sit back and reflect of like a big question that was presented to me is what is the child trying to accomplish by doing the behavior? And I think you're right, the first one that you said was escape. They were trying to get out of having to eat veggies. Okay, so what they were doing was crying and whining and being like little crybabies so that they could get out of doing it. You know, like you're saying, break down the parents long enough and they'll say like, fine, go do something else, you know, like whatever. But that the function of the behavior in this kind of video that we watched is definitely escape. So awesome. Okay, so the next video is a toddler on a kind of famous TV show, was in a pageant, and she was asked, "Are you beautiful?" And the toddler looks kind of, "What are you talking about?" "Of course I'm beautiful." And she gets upset because she says, "I'm always beautiful. Why would the interviewer ask her if she was beautiful when I'm always beautiful?" And so she gets very upset, starts running away crying from the camera crew through the hotel lobby, only to be consoled by parents with little to no success. So someone, tell me what the function of this is.
So partially attention, I would think, but then also tangible, because that's what either she's always been told she's beautiful, so that's her, that's her poison and she needs it, or what, but like she needs to know that she's beautiful. Not just I want the attention, but that's my preferred thing, is like I need to be told how beautiful I am.
Yeah, Amanda, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to chime in on that? Sorry to call you out. Okay, cool. Katie, I agree that yes, I really think that this function is attention. It's kind of a tricky one though, because at first glance, it kind of looks immediately like escape, because she runs away and is like running all over the place because she's so upset about not being called beautiful. And that's not what the interviewer asked her in the first place. But I really think that it is attention, because she wasn't getting the attention that she wanted, because the cameraman didn't think she was beautiful based on her understanding of what the interviewer was asking. So she ran away crying for attention from the people, her parents, who would give her that kind of attention and that kind of reinforcement, right? Yeah. So again, it's kind of asking that question, what is she trying to accomplish from this behavior? And it was definitely attention, right? Even though she was running away to do it and crying and, from that. So cool.
Right, because she wasn't running away to avoid.
No.
Anything.
Yeah, she was running away purely for attention. And that's like that, the question that the specialist that I was talking about this with, she was saying that it's like, what is she trying to accomplish with the behavior? And that kind of made it way more sense to me. So cool, thank you. Last one is, I thought this was kind of a comical too, if you guys got the chance to watch the video, but a toddler is seen crying on the ground in a tantrum. The parent moves out of the view of the toddler, and the toddler immediately stops crying. And then, almost like a game of hide and seek, the toddler like comes around the corner and immediately like falls down dramatically and starts crying again in a tantrum. So that's kind of the video recap. Anybody want, besides Jerry and Katie, who are doing amazing, want to chime in? Bailey, maybe?
Yeah, I think this one's attention, because he didn't really care. He wasn't doing the behavior when they weren't looking, but he definitely paid attention and did it when they were looking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this one was very clearly attention. I thought it was, and the parents honestly were laughing too, so it was kind of comical to watch that. But yeah, so really thinking about functions and why they are important, really to be function minded is to be proactive, because behaviors are way easier to fix early when we start understanding the function of the behavior itself. And so our actions as teachers sometimes can accidentally reinforce the behavior and make it harder to fix later as they continue to grow. And so an example of what I mean by that is, if the function of a student in your classroom's behavior is escape, every time you press that white button for the administrators to come, you're ultimately giving them what they want. They want to leave. So you're pressing a button to get them to leave, essentially. So it's kind of like that reinforcing of the behavior that you don't want, because if you were actually understanding that the function of what they're doing is to get out of the classroom, and you knew that, you could be way more proactive in your reinforcing of, or not reinforcing, but interventions that could prevent that student from wanting to leave in the first place. So it's functions are really important. And it kind of, again, once I took this myself, it kind of blew my mind. So briefly, I'm going to go through the grade 8 of behavior. Thank you for the discussion. It's honestly been really beneficial. So I think that was great. So thank you for the people who chimed in. So this is the grade 8 behavior. There are 8 kind of simple things that you can do. And I guess these are kind of broad strategies that you can use to see some positive change, but it takes time and patience to do them. So the first one is establish expectations and rules clearly and positively. I think some people kind of confuse or put expectations and rules as synonymous, and they're really not. Expectations are what we want, and they should be school-wide. Things like we want kids to be respectful, responsible, and safe. That's an example. Rules, on the other hand, are how we want the students to achieve the expectations. Ultimately, what do we want them to do, which should be around 3 to 5 rules stated positively. So in order to be respectful, which is the expectation in the classroom, the rule is to raise your hand to speak. Or to be safe, if you want the kids to be safe in the classroom, you need to keep your hands and feet to yourself. Or however, whatever level you're at or content, whatever your rules do, needs to directly reinforce the expectation. And you can't assume that students know how to follow rules. I had an aha moment in my own classroom where I was so frustrated at a kid because he didn't know what I thought were to be simple rules that we just know. And then I realized, I was like, he doesn't know what to do. Or, so it was something that I realized that, regardless of where they are, rules and expectations must be taught, and taught with fidelity and constantly, and kind of going back to them all the time. So, and they do need to be age appropriate, obviously. And, for the younger kids, there may need to be visuals for expectations because they can't read yet, which is a great thing. The second is to be clear and consistent with procedures and routines. Procedures are how students are expected to carry out specific activities in the classroom. They should always be heavily focused and reinforced the first weeks of the school year. They should be reinforced all year long. And honestly, these procedures need to be done in a digital platform too, like we're doing right now, to kind of make that connection. All these expectations, rules, procedures, routines, if those can be clearly and consistently met, then probably a lot of the behavior issues seen will start to diminish, because procedures are showing students how to carry on in a classroom. And then the routines are habits, essentially, that are formed by the consistency of the procedures. So they're not exactly the same thing, but they go hand in hand. If you're not having clear and consistent procedures, then your routines are not going to become habits. Another big thing is simply saying, my students know what I expect. It's not okay. You really have to make sure it is consistently and clearly defined as a teacher, and constant through the entire school year. The next one is strategies to acknowledge appropriate behavior. Things like how to acknowledge students who are abiding by the rules. Behavior-specific praise. If, statements, they're very specific and state the student's name and the specific desirable behavior. Saying, hey, you did good is fine, but saying like, Katie, you're doing an amazing job at following directions and participating in the discussion is way more likely to be perceived by Katie. If she gets feedback like that, it's going to continue to reinforce those behaviors, because everybody, kind of likes a gold star. Something I will say is to never take away points. Or maybe not points if you're maybe not in elementary school, but never take away good things that students have earned. That is because of behavior. So in the elementary classroom in particular, things like class dojo points, never taking away those points because they earned them for being good. So the more appropriate response to never taking away points would just be not giving students any points for good behavior. And then being just the acknowledgement, again, age appropriate, consistent, sincere, and as the student continues to do good on that whatever behavior that you're reinforcing through positive specific praise, then it kind of will fade away because they're doing what you expect them to ultimately, which is kind of cool. The fourth one is how to respond to inappropriate behavior. Some of these things I think we do naturally as teachers, but it's nice to see them on a screen. Is prompting, whether visual or verbal. Could be things like, comically, obviously, but just a direct eye glance, the teacher eye. We're all probably really good at that. Redirecting an expected behavior, which is a verbal redirection, or actually reteaching an appropriate behavior, and that's where the teacher and the student models. And then something that you may do or not realize you do it is forced choice, which is basically the choices. You offer students choices of doing like A or B or one or the other, but it has to be good with you, the teacher. So Johnny, you can either do this, which is fine, or you can do this, which the student gets a choice. And because they have that choice, they're more likely to do whatever you're asking them to do. And which is that last point, is it helps eliminate some antecedent based behaviors. The fifth one is actively supervise. Again, things that we normally do in a classroom setting, things like moving around the classroom due to proximity. I know when I had a lot of talkative students, just walking past them really kept their mouths closed really quickly. And if they're doing it more frequently, move around them more, or I was always told when I was still in college in my undergraduate to never turn your back on the classroom and to always position yourself where you can see your classroom. That's great for things like scanning, observing the students regularly, making eye contact, that teacher look, with those that are farther away, frequent interactions on the positive side, and then reinforcing desirable behavior, like basically you get paid to work. You do good things, you get good things to come to you. Basically the extrinsic motivation does work. You may need to, an important thing is you may need to reinforce differently with different students. Again, some of these are not their strategies, yes, but they may not work for every student. So just be mindful of that as you continue on. The sixth one is provide requests that students should be able to do in class. And this is called high P. And basically what this is high probability request sequence, which is an antecedent-based strategy, which is a strategy to do before behaviors happen. And it's basically asking students to make, you're requesting students things that they're more likely to actually do that they normally wouldn't. Here's an example. Say a student in your chorus class comes in, they're brand new, you ask them to participate in singing and they say no. A low probability request, the third point, would be, hey, come participate. Hey, why aren't you participating? Come over here and participate. That's a low probability request because they're most likely not going to do that. And you're noticing that as the teacher, right? A high probability request would be like, you know what? It's totally okay if you don't participate. Can you just come sit with us? Or can you come closer to the rest of the class? That would be like one high probability request. And that student, more than likely, if they're like, oh, I don't have to participate, I just have to come sit right here, okay, I'll probably do that, right? So that's an example of a high probability request. These are like small baby steps to get students to do what you want them to do, essentially, if they're being resistant to requests. So it's kind of, you're just reinforcing compliance using the specific praise. Hey, thanks for coming over here. It's totally okay. Like, clearly something's up. It's totally fine. I'm not upset, but I'm glad that you're here with us. Those like positive reinforcement praise continues, and giving the students time to respond. And so punishing students does not change behavior. And again, punishing students actually more than often serves as a reinforcement of the behavior that we end up not wanting in the first place, which is what we were talking about earlier. The activity sequence is number 7. We're almost done. It's how your classroom instructional tasks and activities are ordered. And this kind of comes directly from the teacher, as how you organize your activities in your lesson plan, how things move around the classroom with transition times, how your classroom is set out, really can help be proactive when it comes to um, different procedures and stuff, and getting kids to uh, basically not what you want them to do by what am I trying to say? You are getting kids to you are controlling the environment. That's what I'm trying to say. And so by controlling the environment of how things go where and what times we go what and this and that, it makes things it's a proactive strategy to get them to not have those moments where things could go wrong in terms of behavior. That was a lot, and I'm sorry. If you have questions, let me know about number 7. Number 8 is assuring academic success. If the academic task is too difficult or uncomfortable for a particular student, the potential for problem behaviors with that student rises greatly. So that's really important to think about. If it is too difficult or too uncomfortable for a student, then more than likely a problem behavior is going to come up in that student. It could be a 3rd grader, for instance, doesn't want to sing because they're uncomfortable, and you continually trying to get them to sing and sing and sing and sing when they're uncomfortable, more than likely is going to cause them to have some sort of problem behavior. So can't do versus won't do. There is a difference. Okay, you can do things, you just don't want to do it yet, which kind of circles back to that high probability request that you would ask of students. Sweetie, I understand that you don't want to sing right now. That's totally okay. Can you just come sit by us? Great. And then the next day, maybe something, okay, hey, you sat with us. That's awesome. Can you sing, quietly, kind of thing. Those small kind of probability requests of academic success, especially in music, is that the can't do versus won't do. No, you can do it, you just won't do it yet. So there is a difference. And then just be in constant contact with classroom teachers about particular student behaviors, and using academic intervention systems to fill in student gaps. So then I have some magical tricks that have worked in my classroom that I think are super important and I wanted to share, and that have worked in other classrooms and teachers that I've talked to over the years. The first one is building rapport and strengthening relationships in your classroom. To me, this is one of the most important things you can do, and you've probably heard it before because it is that important. It takes time, it takes months, even years for those kind of relationships to develop, but when they do, kids are so much more comfortable with you and have this sort of like relationship, friendship, teacher, student relationship that just ends up happening due to the time you put in to build those and strengthen those relationships. So if you're a new teacher or you're not, the kids aren't going to be comfortable with you yet. And they're usually testing you out, like treading the waters to see like, oh, what's the new teacher going to do, So give it time. And I think that is very important. And I just can't stress that enough. Like, give it time and really try to build those relationships. The next one is a positive learning environment. Creating a lively, energetic, engaging classroom atmosphere is super important. A big question that I always think about is, does my classroom decor does it make students even want to come to my classroom? Like if your classroom is dull and doesn't have a bunch of stuff on the walls or isn't colorful, I'm not saying that it has to be like that, but if there's not something that makes them want to be there, that could ultimately start some problem behaviors before they even come to your classroom. I don't want to go to music classroom, I don't like it, or whatever. Like those kind of behaviors could be resolved by having a positive learning environment. And that's not saying you have to have a Pinterest classroom. It's just having a classroom that is engaging them and is a safe space for them. And this also might take time. I feel like a lot of teachers get so overwhelmed with classroom decor their first couple of years, but adding small things in over a longer period of time could be more beneficial for those teachers. And then something that I always said when I was still teaching is that behavior is a choice. And asking students what choice they are making before I discipline them. So as an example, if a student was talking, like I would say, what choice are you making right And I would really stay away from good choice and bad choice. I would say, what choice are you making? It gives the students options because they more than likely know they're not making the right choice, because what's right is not right for everyone. And that's, I think, what I mean by the good choice, the bad choice, what's right choice, what's the wrong choice. What is right or what is good or what is bad is not the same. It's kind of the same thing with disrespectful. That word, it means different things to different people. So just saying, what choice are you making? Is it a choice that's ultimately going to get what you want? And when I presented that to students, it really started changing the playing field when it came to behavior management in my classroom, because I was putting the ball in their court ultimately. Okay, what choice are you making right now? Is it a choice that's going to get you positive stuff, or is it choices that's going to get you some negative stuff that you probably don't want? And almost every single time they knew what to do, and they knew the choices they were going to make. Modeling ideal behaviors, we kind of talked about this earlier, but just continuing to reinforce, whether that's student or teacher or role models. Establishing review and reinforce consistently. We talked about that earlier. Celebrating small wins is always a great thing. Again, gold stars, whether they're small successes or big successes, class parties, things like that, it always seems to kind of work because you're celebrating. Everybody's having a great time. And then something that I watch some teachers do is kind of like a meet me at the door, where every time the teacher comes to the door and they get some sort of relationship building thing, they get to choose how they want to be greeted, whether that's a hug or that's a high five or that's a fist bump or some sort of crazy handshake. That really, it's a really check of how they feel that day. Maybe they're not feeling so good, so maybe they want a hug, and that's kind of a good indicator for you, the teacher. So those are some kind of magic behavior tricks that I think that work really well if they're used with fidelity and used and practiced over time. And then that last step of the kind of going back to the problem solving model, is, did it work? If you were trying something and it's not working, try again. Again, not all interventions are immediate magical behavior fixes. Sometimes they are, which is great. Most times they're probably not. And understanding that one intervention is not always going to work with another, and that some interventions take time. And I think that a lot of the times we get so bogged down and so frustrated about student behavior that we forget that it does take time, and just because one doesn't work doesn't mean another won't. If you have students who are having multiple behaviors representing themselves in the classroom, prioritize the most destructive ones first, and get help from colleagues if you need. Don't give up. If you do end up giving up, it's essentially allowing the behaviors to continue. When I used to observe teachers in the field, I had have conversations with some teachers, and I was like, when you don't address the behavior, you ultimately are saying it's okay to behave like this in my classroom when it's not, but you're just ignoring it. So really, don't give up. Try and try again. Another big thing that I always love to do is having each day is a new day. Every time you see a student, it's a blank slate. No matter if they were the worst student that you ever taught one day, the next day you see them, it needs to be a complete change in attitude towards that student. It's a blank slate every time. And don't take it personally. Again, behavior is an individual thing, just like you have your own behaviors that you do. So when a student don't take it personally when a student is behaving negatively towards you. And then creating opportunities to measure and celebrate growth. Again, celebrate the small wins. And if things still aren't working, start the cycle back over again. Identify the problem. Why is it happening? Maybe, throughout all of this, you should identify the problem, but it's not working. Like you identify the problem, but it's the wrong function. Maybe, I thought they were escaping, but really it's just attention, kind of like that, the pageant girl. So before we wrap up, we have about 7 minutes left. I do want to leave you with this quote on engagement. And it's Um, Really, I think the big thing is the more engaged that we are or engaging our students, the less likely that problem behaviors are going to arise. And so this quote says, the extent to which students are actively engaged in every aspect of the classroom directly correlates to increased academic and behavioral performance. So that's kind of the end of our time, other than a question and a and or question and answer, I should say, and a survey. But kind of reflect on that engagement piece. That the more that you are engaging the kids, the less likely problem behaviors are going to arise. So that's about all the time for that I have, other than question and answers. I got through all my slides. We have about 6 minutes left. If there's any questions that you have, you can ask them now. We can talk about them. I am happy to do so. But before you do leave, if you need to hop off, it's totally fine. I get it. I would love for you to fill out this survey right here. Either you can scan it on your phone and take it quickly, or on another device like an iPad, or Paul is going to put the link to that on the survey. Oh, I see he just did it. Thank you, Paul. But yeah, I'm going to open up the floor now to any questions or any observations you have, or any maybe concerns or questions, or even like tips that you've noticed in your classroom that have worked that you would like to share with the rest of the group. I think that would be awesome too.
I had a question. This is Bailey. So I know we were talking about the attention seeking function, and then about not ignoring behaviors because it reinforces them. So for attention seekers, what is like the best way to deal with them in your classroom?
Obviously, like I was saying, it's kind of hard to do that on a broad scale for a case by case basis. You know what I'm saying? Because every behavior that you see that involves attention is different, from student to student. I think that when the students who get when you are reinforcing the attention, kind of like if that, like the baby that kept falling over every time the parent came by for attention, right? I think that the parents actually did the more appropriate thing by, even though you're not ignoring the issue, you're ignoring the behavior, right? Does that make sense? Bailey, does that make sense? Sorry. I know it's very like broad, like philosophical answer. Does that make sense though, what I'm saying?
Yeah, how about an example? So what if I teach chorus? So what if a student is like purposely singing really terribly and loudly just to get their classmates to laugh at them?
Okay. Are they like consistently like that class clown kind of person? Or is it like
some of them are, yeah. I would say the ones who do that are the more type class clown type kids.
I think that I would wonder if, like you're saying about the attention, is it a constant need for that attention? Because what's happening there, I don't think they're really trying to get attention from you. They're just trying to get attention from their peers. So I wonder if like a proactive step towards that would be more of not letting them do that, but giving them an opportunity to be funny or to have social time. Maybe I'm just like brainstorming based on this one interaction with you, Bailey.
Yeah.
Maybe we could have discussions later, but giving them time to have that kind of social laughter interaction, maybe prior or after, maybe could deter them from happening. Obviously, if expectations are being set and they're not meeting them, then obviously that's where that C comes in, where, hey, like we have an expectation of what is good and what is not good singing in my chorus classroom, and you're consistently not doing that, right? And a lot of the times I have found too that if you are like some students need to see how much they're doing it in a classroom. I had one student in particular, and maybe this might be helpful, where the student consistently interrupted me. And it was one just so frustrating for me. But what I did was I secretly ticked off marks on my notebook every time the student interrupted me. And this was an older kid, obviously. But I called the student after. I was like, hey, right now you're not in trouble. But I want you to know that I showed him my notebook. This was every single time that you interrupted me in a 45-minute class. And actually seeing the visual of them doing that, really, like, they were like, oh, I just don't think that he knew exactly how much he was doing it. And so that kind of was a changing moment in the classroom. So I don't know if something like that could help, like, hey, you're not singing right, and this is how many times you're doing it. If you're trying to be funny, that's like hilarious. Or maybe like, I guess like I keep going back to the giving them opportunities to be funny and silly. I don't know if that would work, or do some like sort of challenge or something to get all the sillies out before class. I don't know. I mean, we can totally talk about it later if you want to. We can exchange information afterwards. But yeah, let me know. I'd love to continue chatting about it. Yeah. Anyone else? Thanks, Bailey.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that, I have a fifth grader who is the class clown. He has always been the class clown since pre-K. And what has worked for me is I found something he's good at, and I let him help. And that gives him that attention that he is wanting. And he's not the class clown in my classroom anymore.
It's true.
That's a good idea. I was thinking that too, like letting them lead a warm up or something.
And maybe even like doing like a silly warm up. Like if they're seeking that funny validation, you know, or that seeking that funny attention from kids, like make it be a silly warm up, whether that's like, I don't know, like some sort of like weird sounding choral warm up, like, you know what I mean? Or like, hey, you know what? You seem to really like to sing bad, or not sing bad, you know what I mean? Like to be a bad example of singing. How about you actually come up to class and show us exactly what it's like, because this is what we don't want, and like make it be this thing, and not as an embarrassment thing, but make it be a funny moment where they like add, like consistently go back, hey, remember that kid? Yeah, that's the one. We're not going to be sounding like that, kind of thing. That might be a huge moment for that kid too. Like you're validating his or her, I don't know, their attention, but you're not also punishing them either, kind of thing. That might be a good thing. Anyone else? This is great.
Well, I was going to actually jump in on that too, because that's what I was thinking. So I've experienced that where, you know, the kid that wants to be funny, 9 times out of 10, they're a natural little leader, and they just want that attention. That's their big thing. But if you can direct that positively, and maybe pull them aside like you did, you know, you said you did the ticking off, you pulled them aside and said, did you notice that you're doing that? And just have that relationship building conversation. Yeah. Like, I know you are the man. I mean, you're the dude that they're all looking to. They want, you know, like you're really brushing that ego a bit. And then to say, I'm going to need your help when class starts next time. And then you're just kind of like building a bit of a partnership with this friend that wants to go down the negative way, but has a little bit of power that he could probably lead the group the opposite direction too for the positive. So then the other piece of that is there are some friends, they just can't behave the whole class. And so finding the limit, you know, they can behave for 15 minutes. We're going to brag those 15 minutes up, because they just, you know, they may not be able to handle the full time. So I don't know, just throwing that out there. Make them a leader.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Katie, and everybody who's talked. It is overtime, and I don't want to make you feel like you have to stay. We want to continue. So if you're ready to go and you've done the survey, which I appreciate, it lets me know if I need to change anything or you would like to see something else in these webinars. So thank you if you did fill that out. That's awesome. If you need to go, that's totally fine, and I'll stay on here as long as we need to talk about some other behavior stuff if needed. But other than that, yeah, if you guys are ready to go, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned a lot from this on behavior and just kind of human behavior itself as a proactive strategy to promote positive classroom behavior. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.